Welcome to the Equipping You in Grace podcast, hosted by Dave Jenkins. The Equipping You in Grace podcast is a podcast about helping Christians develop a biblical worldview in a conversational tone about issues inside and outside the church. Now, for today's episode, let's join our host, Dave Jenkins.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to the Equipping You in Grace podcast. My name is Dave, and I'm the host for this show. And with me today is my friend and brother in Christ, Jay Warner Wallace. Jay, welcome.
Thanks for having me. We have been, as you said, connected online for so long. We got a chance a couple times this year to get together this way. It's been awesome. By the way, I wanted to say you look spectacular today.
Yes. You know, I'm actually, he surprised me, guys, before we were recording, he shows up on the Zoom where we're recording, and he's dressed immaculately, and I'm like, I'm in a polo shirt and, looking probably how I usually do, probably like a bum or something.
But when you're old and ugly, you have to dress better. So that's why I learned that a couple of years ago. So that's why now I always try my best to wear a jacket or something to make me look a little bit better than I usually do.
Yeah. Well, we're already off to a good start here, so that's great.
Exactly.
Well, brother, this is your first time. And tell us a little bit about, your life, your marriage, your ministry, and any ministry projects that you're working on.
Well, so I kind of dumbed into all of this because I wasn't raised in the church and really had no interest in church or in God. My wife was more interested. I was employed, and I had a weird background. I was in the arts first, and then came through the arts to law enforcement because my dad was a cop. And so I became a policeman, and then worked gangs a couple of years, worked SWAT, worked undercover for 4 years. And then I got assigned to robbery homicide, and I ended up working the rest of my career there. And most of it had ended up being cold cases. And along the way, I decided to go to church with my wife because she was thinking maybe we should raise our kids with something, even though I had not been raised that way and didn't think there was any need for it. But I thought, look, if I can make my wife happy, and we met when we were in high school, I thought, sure, I'll go. My dad would do that, by the way. My dad's not a believer, but he thinks that Christianity is a useful delusion. And I thought that would be fine. I mean, great. If it helps your kids to order their lives and behave themselves, I was game. But the church we happened to go into was a church that was not very traditional. It was a big box, big warehouse church. And the pastor there was a regular looking guy. And he said that Jesus was the smartest man who ever lived. And I didn't think that was probably true, but he probably could be an ancient sage of some wisdom, like Baha'u'llah, Buddha. You can learn a lot from people who allegedly were ancient sages. So I thought, well, I want to see what's so smart about Jesus. So I bought a Bible, and it was a pew Bible. It's sitting back here on my shelf, and opened it up and tried to find whatever it is that Jesus said was so darn smart, and ended up being enthralled by the Gospels as eyewitness accounts. In other words, number one, were they really eyewitness accounts? Were they derived from eyewitness accounts? Look, they clearly are making claims about Jesus and about something that this guy did in the first century in a specific time in history, in a specific place on the planet. They're very much like the supplemental reports that I get when I no longer have access to anybody. I don't have access to the witnesses. They've been dead for a decade. I no longer have access to the report writers because they've been dead for a decade. So what do you do? How do you determine if something is true from all these supplemental reports on cold cases if you don't have access to anybody? Well, it's kind of the same problem you have with the gospel authors. You have no access to the witnesses or the report writers. So how do you judge? So it turns out there's a template for this that we use in criminal trials. And I just decided to lay into that template. And I spent, a year, probably 9 months to a year, just examining the accounts. And I was obsessive. I mean, it became like a crazy obsession. We at the time only had 2 kids. I eventually had 4, but we had an extra bedroom. And I used to get up every morning at the crack of dawn before I go to work, and I would be in that room just pouring through, and I ended up buying all the church fathers. I mean, I bought all the stuff I could find from first century history related to the church, and just started to pour into it. And after about 9 months of this, I really got to the point where I was willing to give. I believed that the Gospels were telling me the truth about Jesus, which is crazy if you think about it.
Yeah.
And once I trusted what they were saying about Jesus, I began to reread the New Testament to see what it was saying about me. Most of us who are skeptical don't want to go start. I didn't want to start there. I mean, look, everyone's got some view. And why should I trust the Gospels are telling me anything correct? I just needed to knock down that barrier that I had. And I knew a lot of Christians, well, not a lot. I mean, a handful at work, many more that I arrested that told me they were Christians. And so I just had no respect for Christians. The people at work I knew who were Christians were good guys, but they couldn't tell you why it was true. So I thought, well, okay, look, the reason why I think I was so skeptical is that my family is all atheists, except for my dad's second marriage. He married somebody who became a Mormon. And I have 6 brothers and sisters, half brothers and sisters, who are all raised LDS. Well, look, so it's possible to believe something that's demonstrably false and still have a nice ordered life because of it. This doesn't make it true. So I could have nice police officer friends who said they were Christians. Okay, good for you. Doesn't mean that that's true. That was always my view up front. None of that stuff's true. Mormonism's not true. Christianity is not true. It's all not true. But it still produces good results, which I think is why I was probably willing to go to church to begin with. Because why wouldn't I want those good results for my own kids? My dad wanted them for his kids, and he does not believe Mormonism is true. But he let his wife raise 6 kids that way. So that was kind of my view going in. Yeah. But at some point, I recognized that this was a reliable account, and I started to realize it was also reliable in terms of what it was saying about me and my need for a savior. But luckily for me, I'd already done the work, the heavy lifting. I knew there was one. So I just had to connect those 2 dots, and that's really the story of my conversion and my becoming a Christian. And Susie I didn't think anything was spectacular about it at all. I just thought you just go, you get to a reasonable inference from evidence. But Susie, my wife, would tell you, she thought it was the most miraculous thing she'd ever seen. But to me, it didn't feel that way. It just felt like you just do your due diligence. And I just became obsessed with whether or not these were. Also, what's really interesting about the accounts is that there are lots of, if you're just reading them as an investigator, you will find yourself going, whoa, I've seen that before. I've seen that before in my casework, where these 2 disagreements end up resolving themselves in this way. I've seen that kind of stuff. And once you start to see that, that's what lit it up for me. Initially, what lit it up for me was the fact that the accounts have variations. They don't agree, or they don't seem to agree, because that's very common in eyewitness accounts, even though no one's lying, but they have different perspectives. They have different interests. They have different things they focus on. They won't tell you about some things. They will tell you about others, unless you're there to say, stop, back up now. You mentioned this, this, and this. What about this other thing? Well, I don't have access to my reports to be able to do that. So I have to just piece them together the way I piece together the Gospels. It really was, to me, it was a kind of exciting adventure.
Yeah, that is interesting. As you're talking, I'm thinking you're getting up early, you're going in the other room, and your wife is inviting you to go to church. What is she thinking about all of this? Like, as you're digging into all this stuff, like, what is she's like, did I lose my husband? I'm sure she felt that way probably in the last 25 years, many times. Okay. Because they're all in or I'm all out. And I remember when I first became a Christian, I was working a case as undercover, and we were working a surveillance, and I was in my undercover car, and we had 5 of us in a neighborhood waiting for the bad guy to go mobile. We had one guy on the eye who's watching the front door. When he comes out, we'll all jump into place. We're all sitting in cars in the neighborhood at all the different directions, waiting to see this guy move. And I was reading my scripture, and I was probably a Christian about a month, and but my coworkers had seen the difference, my partners. And one of these guys was very good. He low crawled me up to my car, and he got up behind me. I didn't even hear him coming. If he was a bad guy, I would have been dead. And he just walked up on me from behind and looked over my shoulder and saw that I was reading a Bible. And oh boy, he laid into me. He said, I knew something was wrong. I knew something was wrong, and I knew that something was up. And I suspected this, but I just needed to confirm it. And I know you, Jim, because I was such a committed atheist. Everyone knew I was. I mean, it was the kind of thing because we arrested so many Christians, and they were so easy to mock. And so everyone knew where I stood. And he says, I know you, if you're swinging that far in one direction now, that you'll probably end up being a pastor someday. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. Right? I went to the seminary, and that's, that took a lot longer time. But the point is, I'm either all in or I'm all out. And I think Susie was always more open
to this. I mean, she didn't see any downside. She didn't have the same skepticism. But here's the reason, though. A lot of the skepticism is because police officers use this as both a coping mechanism and as an investigative tool. Look, if the game in any interview is just collect data, if that's the game, well, then you're just going to sit there and, okay, you said this next and you said that next, and I can just be a good listener. But if the game is spot the lie, well, then assume up front that everything's a lie, and then you'll spot the lie. Take the worst case, half empty glass scenario you can with this guy, and you'll probably spot the lie. That requires a certain level of skepticism and cynicism that it helps you to play that game. But my wife didn't have that. So she wasn't looking at it skeptically. She wasn't looking at it cynically. She was looking at it much more openly, but wanting to know if it was true and really wanting to understand the gospel. Because that was not something either one of us understood. Even when I got to the point where I could look at the Gospels and say, yeah, I think this is telling us the truth about the resurrection. Well, why would God have to do it that way? Why would it be necessary to do it? Because remember, if all you're doing is focusing on the Gospels, you're not reading the letters yet. You're just going to spend 9 months testing these accounts to see if they're eyewitness accounts. Think about how thin your theological underpinnings would be if you didn't allow yourself to read into Romans or read into 1 Corinthians to see what the spiritual man, like you just didn't go there. Well, now, so I could get to a place where I'm like, yeah, I think this is all factually true, yet not really know what my need for a savior is yet even, or why it is this is the plan of salvation. So we had a little more work to do. But I think that Susie was much more open to any of that than I was. So she was waiting for me to decide if it was true. And that's basically her view, I think.
That's really good. Well, you have this new book out, Person of Interest, Why Jesus Still Matters in a World That Rejects the Bible. Why did you I think you kind of told us a little bit about why you wrote it, but just tell us maybe a little more, and how has this book been received? I know it came out last year.
Yeah, a lot of it for me was I didn't think I was going to write books about this stuff. I just dumbed into that. I mean, so my journey was that I became a believer, and then my kids were young, children's ministry. Of course, we're going to volunteer because your kids, you always need volunteers in children's ministry. So we got asked, and so we're volunteering. And then before you know it, I'm leading the 5th and 6th graders. But the 5th and 6th graders in our church is 520 students. So it was like I was doing 20 hours a week, and I was working still. I was investigating crime still. So I was doing that. Well, then my kids got older, I became their youth pastor. And then eventually, as they could meet at a high school, I became a lead pastor for a church here we had. And I used to take trips, immersive trips with high schoolers and college age students to both Salt Lake City. It's a great place to teach theology because you're going to be encountering a very sophisticated heresy that really kind of works off of all of the claims of Christianity. So it's really a great way to know what you believe and why you believe it. And then we also took an immersive trip to Berkeley. UC Berkeley, and I was working with Brett Kunkel from Maven Truth. I was working with Sean McDowell, and I was on a trip with Sean training his students. And he said, you should write a book about this. And that was my first book. He was the one who encouraged me. That was Cold Case Christianity. Person of Interest is the 8th. But a lot of what I'm trying to do in these books is just kind of backtrack and say, here's what that first year of investigating Jesus looked like. Number one, I needed to know my hesitation with the Gospels was that they included supernatural elements, miraculous claims, and I didn't believe in anything miraculous. And so I needed to know, is there any good reason to believe in something supernatural? Why do I even think there's a God? I didn't think there was a God. So I had to go backtrack and say, well, I did believe in Big Bang cosmology, right? That everything in the universe, all space, time, and matter comes into existence from nothing. That was my view. So I needed to examine, well, okay, if that's the case, what is the cause of that? It's going to be something outside of space time. I'm already stuck with something extra natural at the very least. And that I captured in a book called God's Crime Scene. But then I looked at the Gospels, and that's captured in Cold Case Christianity. And one of the other things I looked at was the impact of Jesus. My suspicion was, and I always felt this way, is that, okay, if this is really who he said he was, you mean to tell me all we have to account for this is this set of 4 Gospels? It seems to me that if he's who he said he was, we'd have a much bigger set of ripples in the pond if he's the stone that everyone says he is that gets thrown into the pond. Well, of course, no one teaches you this in school, but it turns out that the impact of Jesus in the Common Era, and what we call AD, is so unbelievable, unparalleled, unexpected, unexplainable, that it seems to match, of the three possibilities, man, myth, or Messiah, it matches Messiah much better than man or myth. And I just wanted to take a look at that. And I think as I went through that first year, I might have had what I would call a blogger's kind of blogger's sense of what the claims were, what the evidence was. In other words, if you're just examining it for yourself, you're not footnoting everything and sourcing everything so you can write a book about it. I wasn't planning on writing a book. So I had to go back to my notes and go back to my investigation from 20 years ago and say, okay, now I've got to have a sourced view. And so I wrote a book. This is the 8th book. This is the book that talks about that part of the investigation, which is about the ripple effect of Jesus in history. What leads up to the first century, what follows the first century, and how you could tell that Jesus is who he said he was, even if you had no scripture. Now, I'm not suggesting everything you can know about Jesus, you know about from the New Testament, period. That's the source of information we have about Jesus. But if you destroyed now, 2,000 years later, all New Testaments, effectively destroyed all of them, you'd still be stuck with Jesus because he had that kind of impact on history, that his story can be reconstructed from the most amazing places, even in the first 4 centuries of the Common Era, in literature, from non-Christians, in art, in music, in the history of education, in university campuses, in science, and the science fathers who wrote about him as they were responsible largely for the scientific explosion. People don't realize that of all the people who have fathered scientific disciplines, Christians outnumber every other group combined times 3. No one has done more work in the sciences than Christ followers, period. And even in world religions, his impact on not just the religions that followed Christianity, because they all will hat tip and mention Jesus in their scriptures, but even the ones that preceded, like Hinduism and Buddhism, their leaders now will bend their knee to Jesus and include him in some way as a man on his way to Buddhahood. Everyone's got a place for Jesus in their system, even as Jesus says, no, there's only one way to the Father, it's through me. So I just wanted to capture that in a way that was sourced. So this book has about 400 illustrations in it. And although there's 50 pages in the endnotes, there's another 270 pages in a PDF document online that adds to those endnotes, because it took us 2 years to resource it and really footnote it well. And I wanted to be able to do that. So if I tell you that there's X number of scientists, I want you to know, who are they? What was their denomination? When did they live? What country did they serve in? What are they the father of? And what awards did they win? All of that is in the footnotes, because I just wanted people to see how deep this history is. Because honestly, I was not taught that growing up. I'm in Los Angeles, county. So, I mean, it is what it is. I didn't know any Christians growing up, and no one ever asked me to go to church growing up. I didn't encounter somebody who invited me to church until I became a police officer. I think I was maybe 30. Didn't go to church till I was 35. So it is possible to not know anything about Christianity and to drop in from outer space and actually decide this is true on the basis of evidence. And that's really my story anyway. And this book at least captures. And the reason why I'm writing it now, Dave, is because I feel like we're at a place where we are so divided as a country, so divided as a world, really. And I think that the trajectory for us as believers is not what any of us would like, but at the same time, it's what it is. And I think that for a lot of young people, and most of my work is with teenagers, I'm at a big conference 6 times this year for teenagers, 3 more this year in 2023. So this is my audience, is mostly our young people. And I think that the questions are different than they might have been in my generation. For me, as a 35-year-old, 25 years ago, the question was, is this true? Is there any evidence for this? I think the question has changed. It's not about whether it's true. It's, do I want to wear the T-shirt? Do I want to be identified in this way? We're in an identity generation. And I think that identity is in other words, It's not about the godness of God. It's about the goodness of God. Is Christianity does it matter anymore? Does it represent anything good? Does it cause anything good? Or is it the source of all misogyny, racism, homophobia, transphobia, and every kind of phobia and ism that everyone thinks is so terrible? Are we really the cause of all that? Or is there something about Christianity? The stuff that mattered to me as an atheist was literature, art, music, science, and education. And no one has had a finer impact on those areas of culture than Jesus of Nazareth and his followers. And I just wanted to write a book that really showed why Jesus still matters.
Yeah. Well, I've been I'm going to be 42 in February, and so I've been out of seminary now 10 years, and I've been out of high school for 20, a little over 20 now. And I don't even know how the young people that are coming out of high school, that are coming out of college, that are coming out of seminary, they're facing challenges that I never even faced,
Right.
Even 20 years ago. And so as you're talking about this, I'm thinking, having done that kind of youth ministry, college ministry as well, like, for parents that are facing the challenges that, their kids are coming through middle school and high school, they're going to send them out to college. How do they prepare them well, from a biblical worldview? And I'm sure you get this question quite a bit too.
Mm-hmm.
How do we prepare them for the challenges that they're facing? Like here in Portland, they're getting drilled down on in public school with, the LGBTQ agenda,
Right.
and on and on and on, and critical race theory, and it just goes on and on, right? So
Yeah, I think, well, this is one of the things we definitely have a heart for this. As a matter of fact, Sean McDowell and we wrote a book called So the Next Generation Will Know, which is just how do we teach Christian worldview to Gen Z? And this is very kind of timely, but Gen Z is a certain generation that eventually will be like millennials. They'll be old people, they'll be older. So, but right now, those are the folks who are in high school. And I will tell you that I think that there are some strategies we have to take. Number one, I will say that I think that we do a better job in America of passing on our fandomship than our Christian worldview. In other words, if you're in Portland and you're a Portland Trailblazer fan, you've probably done a better job of passing on your family fandomship of the Portland Trailblazers than you have your Christian faith. Because it's like when we have a few seconds to talk about something fun, we're going to probably talk about sports. Now here in California, Los Angeles County, we got two of everything. We got the Chargers and the Rams. We got the Lakers and the Clippers, the Angels and the Dodgers, the Ducks and the Kings. I mean, this is a sports town. Yeah. And I can tell you that most of my friends who are cops, even who are Christians, can probably tell you more about the last draft of any of those teams than they can tell you about the history of this theological position, whatever it may be, within Christendom. Because that's the thing that drives their conversations. They find a way to bring it to life. Did you see that game last week? I mean, it's like there's excitement in those conversations. What I think is lacking for most of us is we're not as excited about these things. And that's because our passions aren't there. Look, passion is contagious and apathy is contagious. So if you're looking at your kids, I always say, if you look at your kids and you think that they're apathetic about something, well, guess what? You can just turn around and look at yourself, because it turns out they're probably reflecting your apathy or your lack of an interest. Now, what I don't want to do is get legalistic about how I'm talking about, but what I think is, it's not about like saying, okay, we're at dinner tonight, I got to say 3 things about Jesus. No. Like if I'm at dinner, I'm probably going to say 3 things about either, maybe not Jesus particularly, but maybe something secondary, like theology or church or something, missions, something that's on my mind that we're doing last week or we're doing next week. And because we're involved in that stuff, and we're meeting people, or I'm talking about people we've met in the church or met on missions or met at a speaking event, or I'm talking about the next. In other words, this is what we talk about because we are passionate about it. And I think that's one of the ways that we can pass on. It's not like we have to be so rigid and intentional about. We should be intentional, but what I mean is, it can feel like it's almost coerced or forced to our kids if we're not just overflowing. It's out of the overflow of the heart that the mouth speaks, right? So our hearts aligned in such a way, because when you'll teach apologetics. If you teach one of these talks from this book, for example, at a church, people will say, "Man, that's just so much information. I'm not sure how I could communicate." Well, yeah, I get it. I'm not asking you to add another 100 facts to your database. I'm asking you to exchange facts, because you got 100 things up there right now that don't matter. Like I'll tell you, my podcasts are divided between theology, sermons, and sports. I mean, that's just the nature of it. They are divided between theology, sermons, and sports. There's a lot of stuff in my head that is really not necessary. It's what my wife calls sports gossip. Okay. It's like, it's the stuff from talk shows, some sports shows. Okay. Sometimes for me, it's like a useful pastime.
Relaxing.
It's for me, it's almost like just trying to unwind from the things that could make me depressed or anxious about what's going on in the world. I need some place to hide from that occasionally. But I get it, but we become we are doing something with information. I'm just asking people to reprioritize. I will give you one skill that I think is helpful to pass passion on to your kids. And that is that I always try to make sure I give 2 whys for every 1 what. 2 whys for every 1 what. Because as a parent, as a grandparent now, you will find yourself a lot of whats. What's true about Jesus? What's true about the Bible? What's true about God? What? Well, I think young people need the 2 whys for every what. They still need a why, which is like, why is that true? They still need some explanation as to why that's true. We're not so far into postmodernism that we have moved away from just wanting to know. Like the sciences seem to be able to give you that first why. Well, theology also can give you that. The world around, the Bible describes the world the way it really is. So we could offer a why. If I'm talking about the triune nature of God, why do I believe that God is triune in nature? I want to give you that first why. The second why, though, is probably the passion why. And that is, okay, you've told me what you say is true, what scriptures teach, and then you told me why, what's the evidence for that? Now tell me, why should I care? Like, okay, it's great for you, this old guy who's geeked out on theology, but how does it apply to me? Like, what is the crisis that I'm facing that this theological truth addresses? What is the everyday experience I'm going to face tomorrow that that second why does it matter, is why I wrote Person of Interest. That I want people to see that there's an answer for the second why. And I think if we give 2 whys for every 1 what to young people, and here's what I typically tell people: if you've got a what that's on your mind that you want to share with your kids, don't let that what come out until you know the 2 whys. You keep that what in your head until you know the 2 whys, and you give all 3 things at the same time. Because it turns out that the triune nature of God is because God is love. Not God can experience love. God is the creator of love. No, God is love, because he's been in that loving relationship, that triune relationship, from all eternity. Unlike Allah or anyone else, God is love because he is from all eternity like Augustine says, right? The lover, the beloved, and the spirit of love between them. And that's why we crave this, even from our friends. That's why we are so relational. That's why you're depressed on Instagram if no one's liking your post. You are created in the image of a God that is in community by nature. And that's why you feel that desire. I need to be able to show young people why the theology does actually address their everyday. And that will help, I think, us pass on our theological understanding to the next generation. But I think one last thing I'll say about that, and you said it, that we're seeing a lot of this. Look, I just don't know. If you're saying to yourself, I think if I want my kids to go to college or university, I would like them to go to a Christian university. Well, that's because you think that there are different versions of what they could learn in university, and they're going to learn some facts and a bunch of worldview at the same time. And you think you want to protect them from the worldview issues and just get the facts. I understand that. You might even say, then there are some Christian universities I don't even want them to go to because I don't even think they're still holding to a Christian view. Well, back that up a couple of years. Is that also true for high school? You're thinking, I don't want my kids to go to public school because I think that worldview stuff is not worth it. But are there also high schools that don't reflect Christian high schools that maybe don't reflect your views as well? I think if you back this up all the way, you're looking at homeschooling. And I do think my kids have been everywhere. I've had kids that were homeschooled. I have 4. Some portion was homeschooled, some portion was Christian schooled, some portion was public schooled. So I've seen all 3. I went to public schools, of course, but I do think we are moving toward having to take responsibility for our spiritual development of our kids. You can't trust that to your youth pastor. You should not kiss that off to your youth pastor. and for the education of our kids. We can't kiss that off anymore to somebody unless you really have vetted it and you know that this teacher actually holds my view in every nuanced way that's important to me. Well, then you're good. But if you don't, not quite sure, then you're homeschooling.
Yeah, it's really good, really good. We've definitely we've definitely hit that on this show, and I agree with you. I think that is just because, like you're saying, you got a youth pastor that, oh, like I had, we open the Bible and preach expository sermons. That didn't mean, like in my case, my parents advocated their responsibility. They did pass me off to the youth pastor, and the youth pastor, thankfully, by God's grace, stepped up, and so did the youth elder, and so did some of the older people. I'm thankful for that. My parents just weren't equipped, to
Right.
handle that, and so we want to give. We're not trying to, maybe that's you and you're listening to this and you feel like, oh, we're just hammering at you and beating you up. It's like, wait, take a time out here and just realize, okay, you don't have to advocate your responsibility to your youth pastor anymore. Just repent and stop that and do something about it. Don't advocate if you're a grandparent, don't advocate your responsibility to be a grandparent, to care and to come along. Don't advocate if you're an uncle or an aunt. Don't advocate your responsibility just get involved. Don't
That's
sit
right.
on the sideline and my wife and I joke. It's like we have this running joke. It's like wah wah wah. Do you want a tissue for that? It sounds really insensitive, and it kind of is. It's a little bit,
No, we do the same thing. I always say, hey,
we're
rub some dirt in it, or I'll say, So
but
yeah,
the idea behind it is like, hey, just take some responsibility, step up to the plate, be present, do something about it. Don't just, we can just talk and talk and talk and talk about all these things until we're blue in the face.
yeah,
And we could, you and I could too, but that's why, we're out there talking and we're trying to help people.
that's right.
And so, you hear about these things that are discouraging. That should lead you to think about doing, not just talking about it, but doing something in your own family, in your own home, in the areas of influence. And we need everybody. We need not just people that are out there on national media and podcasts and writing books and stuff like you and I are. We need everybody, all hands on deck
That's right.
for this. And so,
And don't get discouraged because look, I mean, in the end, your stupidity is not going to overcome God's power. And it turns out if you knew me at 34, you'd say that dude is never going to be a Christian. And here I am. God will do what God will do. And God's still ultimately in control. So in the end, if you feel like I've done a bunch of stuff in the past 10 years, I wish I hadn't done or didn't do enough. Well, I'll tell you what you can do now. You can be talking to God about it because it turns out that he has the power to change all of that anyway, including every stupid thing you've ever done with your kids. So I always think, hey, I get it. You can have some regret. I do too. Even as a guy who is doing this all the time, I still think I've got 4 kids. If you've got 4 kids, trust me, your kids have embraced this in a spectrum. Some are more committed, some are less. Even if they're all really committed or they're all not really committed, there's still a spectrum there. Well, get over it. That's just the nature of free agency. That's the nature of your kids. That's the nature of the world we're living in. You did the best you can and you're not done. You can still pray about it. You can still model this. And trust me, once your kids start having kids, you could get a whole new opportunity to invest and a whole bunch of respect you didn't get before, because it turns out once your kids see how hard it is to raise kids, they are far more understanding of your efforts to raise them. So just don't get too discouraged. It turns out that God can overcome all of our stupid.
amen. You're talking about your own skepticism, and there is so much skepticism out there today about Christ. We look at the statistics, but we even can look at, the Ivy League schools and many of the people that are influencing, let's say late teens to, they're in college and then outside of college.
Right.
What do you say to those kids that they're thinking through things, they're highly intelligent, they want to go to college, or they're just investigating? What do you say to them about your own skepticism and then facing their own skepticism and searching for the truth?
Well, a couple of things. Understanding the role of evidence is helpful, but to be honest, what's really helpful is to have an environment in which you can express your skepticism. It turns out that almost every survey that's done on this shows that having skepticism or doubt, that's pretty natural. But when you don't think you have a place to go where you can even express them without, being either judged in some way or shut down quickly, it turns out that we just need healthy places to explore the questions and be allowed to ask the questions. If you're a leader of young people, be that place. It turns out that there's a ministry of presence that is often enough. You don't necessarily have to be equipped to answer every question. Sure, there's a lot of times when I get as a young person who'll ask me a question, and I just know, like, I can answer that pretty quickly for you. But the reality of it is, you just need to be able to express it right now. You don't need me to jump in and solve this for you right now. I can, but sometimes you just need somebody who's empathetic enough to let you express your doubt. And so what I want to do, first of all, is if you're a young person who's got doubts, find a place. It might be your youth group. If it's not, find another place, a Christian place that you can actually just express those doubts, that somebody will walk through them with you. They may have an answer for you immediately, or they might say, let me get back to you on that. I'm not quite sure. I've had that doubt too. That places where we can explore our doubts are safe place, because God embraced everyone. John the Baptist, when he's in custody, sent his disciples to Jesus. They said, Jesus, John's in custody. He wants to know, are you the one? Really? John, my cousin, the one who leapt in the womb when our parents were, our mothers met, the one who baptized me and saw the Spirit of God descend on, the one who sent his disciples to me, saying to them that I was the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. That dude, you're telling me he's got doubt? He's asking that question. Seriously, is he asking that question? No. He entertains those doubts, and he says, go back. He does miracles in front of the disciples of John and says, go back and tell John what you just saw. That commitment to trying to address doubt is well within the Christian tradition. You won't be the first person. You won't be the last. And God is not going to abandon you if you've got a question about him. So ask your questions. Find a safe place to do it. Find knowledgeable resources. By the way, there is no excuse now. I always say never pay for something you can get for free. Well, it turns out online, there are tons of resources that are available to you right now. You just need a trusted authority. You just need to know, like, where could I go? Now, I've got a website, coldcasechristianity.com, but one of the biggest resources of question answering is Got Questions. Now, do I agree with everything in any ministry? I don't even agree with myself sometimes. So no, I'm not going to agree with everything everywhere, but there are lots of good places where you can go to get answers if you've got questions. And just to not even try to answer those questions, just to sit in them as an excuse to do nothing. Well, that's a you issue. That's not a God issue. That's a you issue. Let's just be honest about it. If you want to know, the answers are out there. Just be honest, ask the questions, and put yourself in a place where you can ask those kinds of questions without feeling like you're being judged or feeling like there's going to shut you down. And by the way, don't give up on a place if that's what's happening for you at your youth ministry or at your church. Don't give up. There's lots of places. We run ministries where we love to get questions. So don't give up, because there's no reason to give up. What you want to be able to do is to voice your concerns.
Yeah. And I'll just say a few things to tag along with that. If you're a ministry leader and you're getting questions, like I got the most basic question today. Do I have to believe in the third day part of the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15? The answer is, according to Paul in Romans 10, 9 through 17, yes, you need to believe in that Jesus physically rose on the third day. But no question, no matter how basic it is unimportant. And we need to make sure, we need to thank people, especially when they send their question, and we need to acknowledge them, and we need to hear them, and we need to, come alongside them and be like, no, actually, this is what this text says. This is what this means.
Right.
And this is why it's important. Now, some questions are going to be more complex, and so it takes maybe a little more time to answer them. And so we might do an episode of a podcast or something to unpack those things. And so, yeah, be open, be considerate. Make sure you even ask the person, did I answer your question?
Right.
I feel like this was, just basic kind of social social skills. It goes really a long way to show people that you're not only there, you're the trusted resource, but you're also, there to walk alongside them like you would face to face.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Well, brother, this is a really good conversation. Where can you tell us a little bit about, your podcast? Tell us about where we can find you on social media and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like content creation is for me, is not about anything other than a spiritual discipline. It's like part of what I do in my life is I'm going to create content because I'm thinking about these things. So I'm going to write them down and I'm going to podcast about them. And that's really the only ambition we've had. We've been doing a podcast for about 17 years. It used to be called the Please Convince Me podcast. About 10 years ago, we changed it to the Cold Case Christianity podcast. Then we produce a podcast every week. We post it on Wednesdays. We have a YouTube channel, and all of our work, Jimmy and I say ours because Jimmy, my son, is also about an 11-year detective, and he is also contributing to our website, and it's at coldcasechristianity.com. So you can find all of our resources there and all the links to all the apps and books and things like that. But again, like I always say, if you can get it for free, get it for free first. And we try to provide a lot of material there, 3 pieces of content a week that'll help grow you as a Christian. And I think there's probably lots of ministries like Stand to Reason, like your ministry, like lots. You can think of all these apologetics ministries, but more importantly, it's a lot of good theology ministries that are out there. I think you could stay busy. The question is, are you prioritizing this? So this is what it is you're interested in. Because certainly the resources, you couldn't listen to all the podcasts that are available out there. There was not enough time in your life to listen to all those podcasts. That's how much free content is out there. So no more apathy. You got to get off the stick. Like C.S. Lewis said, it's either not true and therefore it's not important at all, or it is true and it's the most important thing you'll ever know. The one thing it cannot be is moderately important. So it's about time for us to make sure that we treat it as importantly as it really is. So I want to encourage you all to do that.
That's wonderful, brother. Well, as I always say at the end of these, there's so much that can be said, and we've really only scratched the surface. And this is a really good book that you definitely want to check out. So just as we, wrap up this conversation, can you give our listeners and those who watch it a few takeaways?
Yeah, I think what I wanted you to know is that it turns out that we've been asked to have a forensic faith, a faith that is going to have questions, because only in every jury trial, I provide a jury with a certain number of evidences, and there's a step at the end of the evidence trail that you have to take to a verdict. I can't answer every question. I can give you everything you need to know, but not everything that can be known. And that's also true for us as Christians. We have good reasons to believe something is true, but at the end of that chain of evidence, you're going to have to take a step we call faith. But it's not blind, it's not uninformed. And I think when our young people know that this is a reasonable worldview that describes the world better than any other worldview, they are going to take that step with us. So I want to encourage you to do that.
Yeah, that's really good, brother. Well, guys, we've been talking with my friend James Wallace about his book, Person of Interest, Why Jesus Still Matters in a World That Rejects the Bible. Please go get this book. You'll really enjoy it. Take your time reading it. Look at all the things that he is talking about and really take it home and digest it. It will help you immensely. So thank you, brother, for your work.
Thanks, Dave. I appreciate you.
You too.
Thank you for listening to the Equipping You in Grace podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, rate us on the app, and share this with your friends and family on social media. If you want to find us on social media, you can find us on Twitter @Servants of Grace, on Instagram @Servants of Grace, or by searching @Servants of Grace on Facebook. You can also find this episode and many others like it on the front page of our website, servantsofgrace.org.